Okay. Okay. All right, we're on Grizz's stream here. We're gonna move away from that. Just pause that puppy. Okay, so uh, we're gonna actually just turn that sucker off for a second. All right, what are we talking about today? I don't know. Um, One thing I want to talk about is philosophy. I'm a baby philosopher, right? So, what does that mean? Well, it means I did a couple semesters as a philosophy major recently. I had a different bachelor's degree in something else, but I went back to get a little philosophy knowledge, um, and then I ran out of money. So here we are. Learned learned a fair amount though. Um, at some point, you gotta walk on your own, and I obviously have the arrogance to think that I can walk on my own now, which is total bullshit. But we're gonna see what we can do anyway. Um. Okay, so I've been thinking about the value of having arguments for your positions, or developing positions critically, because most people, they basically develop their position uh, through osmosis. They have people they know that they like, and those people say things, and they're like, not bad. I will adopt that. They don't think it logically. It sort of lurks somewhere until there's some other context in which they bring it up again. It's like, oh wait, I heard something somewhere. Let me say it as if I'm the one who came up with it. And um, I think that's a way that people often work. So, what our goal is to try and develop our positions concisely. That is, develop concise, well thought out positions. And how are we going to do that? Well, good question. I am not. I have some ideas. One thing I'm interested in thinking about is logic. What is logic really? It's kind of like math, but it's not really math, but it is. It's one of the foundations of mathematics, though it's not the foundation of mathematics. I don't really know. Like, I don't know if even that question has coherence to say, like, what is logic? Logic is a kind of human created system of manipulating words, maybe, or information, perhaps, is a better way of thinking about it, just because such things as like logic gates in computing, and that's not, I wouldn't really call that words, I would call that information. And if you were to try to pin me down on what the difference is, I wouldn't have much to say on that that's coherent in and of itself. But our favorite place is going to be probably the the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. That's going to be one of our primary locations. of inquiry, right? All right. That's not all. Virtue. Virtue. I'm thinking about the idea of virtue. And as much as having well thought out, reasoned positions are, as good as that may be, I think there's something to be said about the way that one lives as its own kind of argument for a way of life. That is, you can use as much reason and logic as you possibly can. You can have very consistent, intensely well thought out positions. But if you aren't living those positions, then all you are doing is sort of engaging in a thought experiment. You're not engaging in a life experiment, a way of living. So, that's been something that's been hard for me. It's hard to really I mean, especially because I'm wishy-washy, right? Like, I don't really have a lot of opinions about a lot of different things. It's hard to live that way. It's hard to live accordance to your values if you don't really have values that you've worked towards aligning yourself with. So I have certain values, things I say I value, like wisdom, right? And I've spent a fair amount of time sort of treading water around what the idea of wisdom even is. And I'm not fully sure. Like, I've read some stuff. Like, I've read. Okay, so if you are new to the channel, as new as it is anyway, and you haven't really looked at the other stuff on here, I mean, obviously, I've got some inspiration from a fair amount of inspiration from Vervaeke. In fact, the name of the channel, Super Salient, it's from it's part of the Vervaekean lexicon. I just took it because I needed a YouTube channel name, so that's my origin story. But virtue, damn it, I lost my train of thought. Damn it. Living a life aligned with our virtues. It's hard to do. Yes, wisdom. What does that even mean? So there are studies, there are people who study wisdom, what it might mean, and then how we might live in alignment, to use some language, with our virtues, with our to be wise. It's harder than it seems. I mean, there are ways in which, for instance, like taking a modern psychological frame, we could, try to think about ways to be in the world that are healthy for us, like boundary setting, interpersonal skills, how to be kind to other people, how to be kind to ourselves. And, modern psychology doesn't have a monopoly on these kinds of ideas. I mean, they go back to things like Stoicism and Buddhism and the axial stuff, the axial age systems of ways of living. And so I think about my own life, right? I think about like what's a solid foundation from which to live. And I often find myself going back to Buddhism again and again and again, because Buddhism is something I discovered early on. I read I always forget what sutra it is. It was in some tiny little book my sister had, and I've been trying to find the tiny little book again, and I don't know what it was. So when I was a kid, but I think it was the Diamond Sutra. Just give me a second. Give me a second. Diamond Sutra. So we got the Wikipedia pulled up. Got the Plum Village channel. Or the Plum Village website. No. Okay. So it was the Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra. Let's see. Alright, so we've got Plum Village popping up for this one, too. Okay. So we can see Thich Nhat Hanh's version of this. I think it was the Heart Sutra. My goodness. Thank you for bearing with me here. So entertaining, I know. Let's see. BuddhaNet. Let's see what they have to say. Okay, well, hold on. Okay, so here is Thich Nhat Hanh's. I'll just read it for the channel and for posterity. Okay, so it says, the insight that brings us to the other shore. Maybe I can put it on the screen here. Okay. Alright, so Avalokiteshvara, while practicing deeply with the insight that brings us to the other shore, suddenly discovered that all 5 of the skandhas are equally empty, and with this realization, he overcame all ill being. Skandhas. If you don't know what a skandha is, you're in company because I haven't been a good Buddhist for a long time. So skandha, according to Wikipedia, is heaps, aggregates, collections, or groupings. In Buddhism, it refers to the 5 aggregates of clinging, the 5 material and mental factors that take part in the rise of craving and clinging. So, form, sensation, perception, mental activity of or formations, and consciousness. Right? Okay, so those are the skandhas. So he's saying all of the 5 skandhas are equally empty, and with this realization, he overcame all ill being. So he realized they were empty. Listen, Sariputra, this body itself is emptiness, and emptiness itself is this body. This body is not other than emptiness, and emptiness is not other than this body. To me, I remember this as form is emptiness and emptiness is form, but apparently this is this translation. The same is true of feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. So if you remember, sensations, perceptions, mental activity, formations, and consciousness. So those are the skandhas, I guess. Listen, Sariputra, all phenomena bear the mark of emptiness. Their true nature is the nature of no birth, no death, no being, no non-being, no defilement, no purity, no increasing, no decreasing. Ill-being, the causes of ill-being, the end of ill-being, the path, insight, and attainment are also not separate self-entities. Whoever can see this no longer needs anything to attain. Bodhisattvas who practice the insight that bring us to the other shore see no more obstacle in their mind, and because there are no more obstacles in their mind, they can overcome all fear, destroy all wrong perceptions, and realize perfect nirvana. All Buddhas in the past, present, and future, by practicing the insight that bring us to the other shore, are all capable of attaining authentic and perfect enlightenment. Therefore, Sariputra, it should be known that the insight that brings us to the other shore is a great mantra, that most illuminating mantra, the highest mantra, a mantra beyond compare, the true wisdom that has the power to put an end to all kinds of suffering. Therefore, let us proclaim a mantra to praise the insight that brings us to the other shore. This is, I'm sure that's pronounced Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhisvaha would be my best translation or pronunciation of that. Anyway. So yeah, that is that. That was my first introduction to this sort of world. It really messed me up because I had no idea what they were talking about, but it was fascinating to me. Mainly because I was miserable at the time and was looking for a way out of my own suffering. So that led me down a path of confusion, philosophical confusion. Eventually, I settled on Zen Buddhism at some point because Zen Buddhism to me seemed the least mythical to me at the time, the least superstitious. I was a very practical child. I did not want to be sold a bunch of bullshit, and obviously I knew everything at the time, so except for how to relieve my suffering. So obviously I knew the difference between what was true and what is not, and I knew that superstitious stuff was bullshit. I'm being sarcastic, but only semi-sarcastic. I've come to maybe appreciate a little bit more the mythicalness of the human mind. I mean, every thought, I tend to get stuck in analysis paralysis because every thought that I think I know is not really well founded. It's all just a bunch of um, stuff I've kind of heard before. Which kind of reminds me, I've been watching Westworld, and I think it feels like something comparable to like how the people how the robots gain consciousness is sort of through this iterative death and rebirth of themselves in different situations, and eventually they come to realize through just the way that they've been coded some form of consciousness. And though I think that's there's no coding that could ever actually do that, I think we do that in a way. Not that we're born and reborn, but I think we internalize people, and we relate to the people we internalize, and that sort of changes how we are in the world. So yeah, if you've been following this thread, then you're doing better than I am. The Heart Sutra. I was reading the Heart Sutra. I said that's what's Buddhism is what got me on this sort of path of searching for wisdom. Eventually, I fell out of Buddhism because it was a little too esoteric and a little too hard, and I got into some more bullshit in the form of, as embarrassing as it is to say, the pickup artist stuff. I was 17 and lonely. And probably needed my feet to be a little more on the ground than trying to browbeat people with how spiritually advanced I was. Because obviously, I was. So, a little bit about my background. We are going to what are we gonna do? I want to talk about wisdom. Okay, so yeah, I was talking about wisdom. I was saying that it is hard to really understand what wisdom means precisely, or in a way that one can act out, right? So, in theory, so maybe we can reason it out, and maybe we can figure out how to get there. And this isn't me doing this for the first time, but probably more like the millionth and first time. So let's throw it up on Notepad. Wisdom. Can you see all that? It's kind of small. Here. We're going to shrink this up a bit. Oh, that's so annoying. There we go. Wisdom. What is it? So what is wisdom? So a way that I've thought about wisdom before is knowing what to do when and how. So if you listen to Vervaeke stuff, you would probably think about this definition in terms of what he calls phronesis. Phronesis. Wisdom in determining ends and means of attaining them, practical understanding, and sound judgment. And this is from dictionary.com. It's also sort of known as prudence, practical virtue, practical wisdom. So I don't know if this would be really. I think Vervaeke would consider this more a. What are the two things? Theoria and. Fuck my brain. But basically, there's the theorizing and there's the practice. Practice and theory. The practical doableness of a thing and the theory about how to do that. And the way that these things are supposed to work together is they're supposed to be in a kind of dynamic tension with each other, where the we gain enough practical experience to develop a generalized hypothesis, and then we use that generalized hypothesis to extrapolate more about uh, the practical side of things, to come up to generate new ideas of how to play. And as we generate those new ideas of how to practice, how to do the thing, and right now in my mind I have music as an idea. As we generate that kind of thinking, as we generate that kind of new ideas, we can expand the theory because we've created more practice. We've created more stuff that we can then hypothesize about or to develop theories about, and then it goes back and forth and back and forth. And this is sort of the dynamic tension of how we are in the world. So there's the thing we're doing, and then there's the theory about the thing we're doing, and they're meant to inform each other. He would call this something like he would call this, oh, what's it called? Uh, Combat? No. There's a word, but basically the idea is opponent processing. Opponent processing. So the Chinese have the idea of, was it the Chinese? I don't. Is it iron sharpens iron? Iron sharpens iron. Oh, that's Proverbs. That's religion. I feel like the Chinese had a similar saying, though. I mean, I know they had, like, iron wrapped in silk. That's a different thing. But, people... Listen, human existence, there's only so much variation that can occur that's so different, Like, there's a fair amount of variation, but there's only so much variation in how we humans do the thing, do the humaning, the way that we do. So, people are bound to stumble across similar shit. All right, so, is this a good definition of wisdom here? Knowing what to do when and how. Is that sufficient? Well, let's say that it is sufficient. So let's say all that wisdom entails is knowing what to do when and how. I mean, this is very general. Like, so what? So, like, it doesn't really help to say this. Like, this is not really actionable, an actionable definition. Of course, knowing what to do when and how. Like, of course that's a good thing, right? But then there's, how do you know what to do when and how, right? And that's not really something that you can theorize about. That's something you have to go out and actually do. In order to know what to do when and how, I think you have to do a lot of wrong things at the wrong time in the wrong way. And that's one way of going about it. And that's a necessary part. So we could call that practice. Right? So an aspect of wisdom has to be practice. And the reason it has to be practice is because there's the only other way that we can know what to do, when, and how is if we were to have a teacher. So this is the another piece. Having a teacher. So what is the purpose of a teacher? Well, a teacher, trainer, coach, whatever, can create a space for you to train, and if they are properly attuned to your where you are at in your learning process, they can fine tune your attention to the right stuff. So in Vervaekean language, and I shouldn't call it that, it's cognitive science, it's 4E cognitive science, and even in design, this kind of things to attune to, these are called affordances. Affordances. I think it's 2 F's. Affordances. So an affordance is something that's interactable. It is a thing with which you can relate to in a particular way. So, example is, this cup is graspable, right? I'm grasping it, I'm holding it. And sorry for the flickering of my screen. It's the reflection from, I have a TV screen as my monitor at the moment. Maybe I'll change that at some point. So affordances, right? So basically what having a teacher can do is a teacher can help you recognize affordances by tuning into where your attention is and giving you the teacher ought to have a set of techniques to stretch your attentional capacity. So as a beginner, you're going to make systematic errors. You're going to make systematic errors in the way that you are engaging in whatever activity, right? So you're going to be engaging in the activity, you're going to be doing it wrong, and you're probably going to be doing it consistently wrong. So what the teacher can do is they'll attend to that. They'll be like, okay, so they're stuck here. There is something conceptually maybe they're getting hung up on, or if it's music or physical activity, maybe there's not enough muscle memory yet, so you have to build up the muscle memory. It's whatever the teacher's job is to sort of troubleshoot what the students' errors are, what's causing the students' errors, right? To help them, generate affordances. So then what the teacher will do, the way that these the tools of the teacher is basically how they get you to generate affordances is going to be by constraining your practice. So a teacher will constrain your practice. This is what any kind of exercise is going to be like. So I keep coming back to music. A scale is a constraint because you're not it's not a song. A scale is meant to constrain your attention to the relevant notes of the sound of relevant notes, right? So there's some set of notes that you play that when played together, they create a certain feel, a certain vibe, right? So when you play a major scale, it sounds happy. When you play a minor scale, it sounds kind of sad. These are sort of, I don't know if every civilization has thought of these in these way, but that tends to be how we think about them generally. You don't typically hear sad songs in major keys if you want them to be, unless you're doing some kind of a juxtaposition type of feeling. So like Hey Ya comes to mind. Very upbeat song, saddish lyrics. That's by Outkast. Anyway, so a teacher will constrain your practice so that you develop the capacity to have the affordance. So in music, you develop the affordance of like understanding majorness, the notion of like happy sounds, right? You got to build that in, and then you have things like arpeggios, which are like chordness, the ratios of notes to each other, and the vibe that sort of has, right? And okay, so a teacher will constrain your practice. So cool. We've gotten this far. Then what? Okay, so I was thinking having a teacher is good for dynamically constraining your attention such that you will be able to gain wisdom in a certain area, right? So I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about what it means to be, what is going on when we are learning a subject, any particular subject. And I was thinking about, evolution. If you believe in the theory of evolution, you think about things in terms of evolution, right? The idea is you have different sort of organisms existing in different environments. Some are really fine-tuned to their environment. Some are a little bit more flexible, right? So you've got tightly coupled organisms, that is, they're tightly coupled, very sensitive to the changes in their environment. And then you have more loosely coupled organisms that can sort of adapt to a number of different environments, and maybe they don't fit so thoroughly into their own environment. They're not like perfect for their environment, but they do okay. They're fine, right? And maybe they have a little bit more flexibility. So I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about my understanding of the book After Phrenology. So that book is After Phrenology, which is by Michael Anderson. I haven't read the book through, but the basic thesis is our brain creates tiny little adapting machines that adapt to a certain environment, and they sort of those things sort of run in the background. Things that take conscious effort then become more subconscious or unconscious, however you want to word it, and then those things are kind of always working in the background. So once you have those things sort of working in the background, they're processing information in a certain way, they're paying attention to certain things, dynamically shifting to different things, right? So I was thinking about what subjects are, and there's sort of a way of looking at subjects. Another word for a subject is a topic, right? And what a topic is a metaphor. It stands for topography, right? A topography is the lay of the land. Now, maybe I'm being stupid right here. So just let me topic okay, just so that y'all have some receipts. Maybe I'm nuts about this. Okay, so Etymonline, ETYMONLINE.com. Topic: a class of considerations from which probable arguments can be drawn. Singular form of topics, 1560s. The name of a work by Aristotle on logical and rhetorical generalities from Latin. That's cool. I have to read more Aristotle, if I'm being honest. From Latin topica, from Greek ta topica, literally matters concerning topoi, commonplaces. Neutral plural of noun use of topicos pertaining to a common place. Of a place, locale, from topos, place. The meaning, matter treated in speech writing subject themes, first recorded 1720. Topos, place, region, space, also subject of a speech, a word of uncertain origin, the broad semantic range rendering etymologizing difficult. Topical, pertaining to a place. Right? So a topic is a subject. It's a place. It's a metaphor indicating that we're exapting our ideas of places, like lays of the land, our moving through space, and we're applying it to the idea of ideas. Right? There's some place, there's some space that exists that has this set of characteristics to which we can adapt. Right? So basically, any subject, any topic is kind of a place. It's a kind of environment, right? So we can invoke here the idea of the agent-arena relationship. The agent-arena relationship is really the organism-environment coupling relationship. It's how an organism couples to its environment. So we create this we live in this subject-oriented space, right? We learn about the affordances within that space, that topic, that subject matter. Subject matter. Listen to that. There's matter. There's stuff in the subject space. A subject is a constraint. Environments differ. Subjects differ. There may be similarities between different environments. For instance, different environments may have trees. Hot places and cold places have trees. Cold places are going to have more evergreen trees, and hot places are going to have, they're going to have evergreen trees, but they're going to have other trees as well, right? I'm not an arborist. I don't know trees that well. So, like, subjects may have similarities. I think you could, if you were going to draw a metaphor, you could say mathematics is like evergreen trees. That is, evergreen trees seem to do well in a very broad range of environments, and mathematics seems to be able to infuse itself into a broad range of subjects, right? All right, so let me write this down. So a subject or topic is like an environment. Subject or topic is like an environment. So we learn to pay attention to the affordances within a particular subject. So like in math, we learn the details about numbers. Numbers are the primary stuff of the subject of mathematics. So, numbers are the primary stuff of the subject of mathematics. Numbers have qualities. Numbers can be used in different ways. They can be used algebraically. They can be used in calculus. Numbers aren't necessarily numbers. Numbers can be letters that are generalities of numbers. Those generalities can be their own representing. Those numbers can represent qualities of the physical environment, so they can kind of infuse the real world, such that it can be hard to distinguish whether it's math that comes first or the real world that comes first. I mean, this is an argument in philosophy, right? And I'm a baby philosopher. I'm learning to develop my arguments, my thoughts, and not very good at it yet, but we're working on it, right? So this, I feel like, has implications. What are the implications? So if it is true that subjects are like environments and we're adapting to a space, right? That particular space. It means we can be very tightly coupled to a subject matter, and this is expertise. So if we're tightly coupled to a subject matter of expertise, what that can make us is fragile to different environments when we're placed in them, right? So when we take our expertise, that is, another word for expertise is adapted to a particular environment, highly coupled to a particular environment. The notion of expertise sort of invokes a value it sort of invokes a value, like we want to have expertise. But if we can reduce the value and think about it in terms of that coupling, we can understand how having expertise can actually make us fragile to the subject that we are tightly coupled to. The other issue with expertise is it can constrain our perspective. Because we're so hyper-focused on the affordances within that subject, we have lost, or we lack the capacity to pay attention, or we have an underdeveloped capacity to pay attention to other things in the environment that are important. So, like, a writer is not the same thing as a physicist. They're paying attention to different things. A writer is going to be paying attention to notions of words and writing. And I'm not saying that a writer can't be a physicist or a physicist can't be a writer, but assuming that they only have expertise in these particular fields. So you have a physicist who's a really shitty writer, and you have a writer who's a really shitty physicist, right? They just have different sets of affordances. If you try to put them in each other's domain, they're going to suck. Now you can cross-train them. You can have physicists learn to write. You can have writers, who learn about physics, and that's fine. So now you have cross-pollination. You have someone who's adapted to multiple environments. Cool. To me, this seems like a reasonable way of thinking about things. All right, so tightly coupled to sets of informational constraints. So how does this tie back to wisdom? Well, what this brings up is I want to talk about, okay, so you have affordance landscapes, right? Affordance landscapes are basically the things that the relationship between an environment and an agent, right? It's what to pay attention to if you're going to exist in a particular space, and the space is sort of defined by the agent, and the agent is defined by the space. So it's this dynamic, mutual changing that comes from a conversation between you adapting to the environment and the environment emerging more from your relationship to it. What you can pay attention to emerges, and then by seeing new things in the environment, those things change the way you are as a thing adapting to a thing. Okay, so say you want to be wise. Say wisdom is an area of expertise. What sort of expertise is it to be wise? Well, knowing what, if it is just knowing what to do when and how, knowing what to do when and how, the implication is that you're multifaceted. That is, you have developed the capacity, you have adapted to some degree in a variety of environments. Because in order to know what to do, you have to in order to know what to do, you have to have been exposed to a variety of environments to recognize what stuff in that environment is most pertinent to you at the time, or relevant to you at the time. And knowing what is most relevant depends on how you are being. That is, what type of being you are, what sort of things you're acting out. Is that true? So what I'm sort of thinking about is optimality, like being optimized. I mean, that's another way what we're sort of talking about. When we're talking about an organism that's tightly coupled to an environment, we're talking about an organism that is optimized for a specific set of constraints. So the what is it? The finches, Darwin's finches, were highly optimized to the Galapagos. So, optimization. We don't want to be too optimized because over optimization is fragility. But we don't want to be so broadly oriented that we lose our competitive advantage within multiple different environments, right? Like, we're just ill adapted to lots of different environments. So, from this perspective, a wise person is someone who has adapted to multiple environments such that they can recognize what are the relevant constraints at any given time. Now, perfect information is impossible. That is to say, we can't possibly know everything. We are mortal and thus there is a constraint on our existence such that we cannot, we can't know everything. So we have a limitation. So that limitation is, so the limits of our wisdom are constraints on our capacity. A constraint capacity for wisdom is our mortality. That is the time, the amount of time we have to live. Cool. So, we only live for a certain amount of time. Thus, if we want to be wise, assuming that this is the correct definition of wisdom, what we want to do is adapt quickly to multiple different environments. But is this what we think about? Is this really what wisdom is? Is wisdom just knowing what to do when and how? Seems a little vague. I mean, obviously vague. So I'm trying to think. Maybe we could pull up. Okay, so it seems reasonable to say something like a wise person is a virtuous person. You wouldn't say a wise person is not a virtuous person. That doesn't seem right. We wouldn't say someone is, they don't have any virtues, but they're very wise. If we did say something like that, we might be talking about the things that the person says, but we probably would say they were wise in what they say, but not in what they do, which we tend to, wisdom in general tends to be thought of as something you do. So I wouldn't even really call someone who says wise things as a wise person. Wisdom, I feel like, typically implies a doing of some kind, right? So, insofar as a virtue is doing something well, doing a thing well that is adaptively advantageous. Is that merely what we mean, though? Is adaptability, strictly speaking, all wisdom is about? Because, if it is, you could say, psychopaths are highly adaptable people. They're very manipulative. Do we consider them wise? There's that book, The Wisdom of Psychopaths, and there's probably something to that. But there does tend to be a notion of goodness. And when we're talking about that, especially in the English language, we're invoking, the history of Platonic and Christian thought. So Platonic and then by extension Christian thought in this notion of goodness, right? So we tend to think of wise people as good people. We don't think this person is very wise but they're an asshole, unless we think of their assholeness in service to their wise teachings. But still, there's something that seems insufficient about this definition. For one, it doesn't really give us a practical place to start with respect to living a good life. So we started this. We started this discussion. I was talking about Buddhism as sort of the thing I go back to again and again and again, because it was something I discovered at an early age. It had its influence. I really liked I think I just was really drawn to the lists of definitions of things. Just felt really like a well thought out system that was clear and concise. Christianity, you sort of have to wade through all of the words. I think it just aren't enough lists. You got the 7 deadly sins. You've got the 10 commandments. I mean, there are lists in Christianity, but I think the Buddhists really got the list thing down. You've got everything is broken up into different lists: 2 truths, the 4 noble truths, the 5 skandhas, the Noble Eightfold Path. Like, everything is a list. I mean, lists are useful. I think that was really what drew it to me. Just, you have lists of things, and it's very concise, and you just sort of follow the link tree down the stuff. It's laid out. It's the topics are linked. It's a topography. See, we're coming full circle. So I come back to Buddhism again and again. If we were to think about that, like, okay, so would we consider a good Buddhist a wise person? So here we have a person who is following the Noble Eightfold Path, right? Noble Eightfold Path. Noble Eightfold Path. I could probably remember it if I really sat down and thought about it, but we can pull it up on Wikipedia and just sort of cover it. Okay, so we have right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and okay. I've heard it defined as right concentration. On Wikipedia, they're saying right samadhi, unification of mind, which is interesting. This is actually, I haven't read this. So on the Wikipedia page, it says Bronkhorst notes that neither the Four Noble Truths nor the Eightfold Path discourse provide details of right samadhi. Several suttas, such as the following, equated to jhana. What is right concentration? Okay. In the Theravada tradition, samadhi is interpreted as concentration on a meditation object. Buddhaghosa defines samadhi as the centering of consciousness in consciousness concomitance evenly and rightly in a single object at state of virtue. Okay, so here's the problem that we have, is if it is the case that we are not yet currently wise, do we at least have the capacity to recognize wisdom when we see it? I think to some degree yes, and to some degree no. There is a kind of wisdom with respect to recognizing wisdom itself. Maybe you could call this recognizing your betters, right? So you have some subject matter, some topography, some topic, some environment to which you're trying to adapt. In this case, we're saying that there's some domain, wisdom, to which we are trying to adapt ourselves. In which case, there are certain characteristics that are usually, I think, defined by the fundamentals of that system of thinking. So in mathematics, we would call this a facility with manipulating numbers in different ways. In music, we would say some facility in manipulating notes in different ways. In like a sports, we would say some facility in manipulating our body that to align with the constraints of that environment in specific ways. So there's something to do with manipulation of a thing within a constrained environment. So does that seem to translate to wisdom, to like the domain of wisdom? Could we say uh, wisdom is the arena with which we manipulate ourselves to the constraint of um, I'm tempted to use the word right action. So like, but does that is a wise Christian similar to a wise Buddhist? What is the work of wise doing? Like, I feel like we could say a good Christian is a wise Christian, and a good Buddhist is a wise Buddhist. We wouldn't say this Buddhist is. They're a bad Buddhist, but they're unwise. Unless we were superimposing maybe a different sort of constraint on that system, right? So we might say, like, um, a Buddhist might be bad insofar as they lose sight of some aspect of their humanity in by the virtue of trying to tightly fit themselves into the box that Buddhism tries to fit them in. Being attempting to be overly perfect, but then I don't think we could really consider that person to be a good Buddhist in the same way that we couldn't consider like a Christian to be someone who browbeats anyone with their Christianity. Like, I don't think that would be something we would consider, right? As good. But does that fundamentally mean that they are wise? Well, both Buddhism and Christianity have a kind of endpoint, right? So you have the kingdom of God, and you have nirvana, and you have systems that are meant to get you there in the way that you are, in the way that you are existing in the world, right? Is this frame itself, the evolutionary frame, as useful as it is it missing something? Is the frame that I'm using to analyze here taking something out of the system itself? Something that the system has without imposing this idea on it. So like there's a sense that I have that by thinking about Buddhism in terms of like an evolutionary set of constraints that we adapt ourselves to, and then we become better, towards the end goal of nirvana. There's some meaning that feels like it's lost, because when we think about evolution, we tend to think about, well, survival of the fittest. You're fitting how well you're fitting to your environment, and there's no real morality associated with that, and yet these systems are inherently moral systems. So these systems are inherently moral systems. What does that even mean? You have some set of morals. We like to consider ourselves good people, moral people. And what are these notions doing? These notions of morality. Is it safe to reduce the perspective to simply like a cooperative kind of pro-socialness? Is that all morality is doing? Kind of like a steadfast pro-social inclination. Not a weak pro-social inclination that is people-pleasing, but a strong version that is valuing being beyond mere appeasement. So you are no longer taking what is good to be what people think is good. You're not filling the empty constraints of foolish sort of wants and needs, but you're moving towards what might actually be good underneath the foolishness. Is this the case? Is this good? I feel like there's something to this. So morality. There is no inherent morality in the invocation of the evolutionary frame on all of these subjects. And maybe that's a useful way of thinking about it in some ways, but maybe, well, the evolutionary frame, what is good in the evolutionary frame is what adapts the organism to the arena, effectively, the environment. That's the end goal, the dynamic orientation, the North Star or something. So what's useful about the evolutionary frame is you can apply it towards subjects that don't have morality, and you can apply it towards subjects that do have morality. And necessarily then it can't have a moral aspect to it. So then maybe what we can say is it's a superset of which moral frames of mind are a subset. And these moral frames of mind, although they are a subset of the evolutionary superset, they are particularly well suited for the existence of humans. That is, humans in adapting morality become better, but yeah, this is tricky to tease out. It doesn't really make sense. Okay, so if we're gonna invoke Vervaeke's work, which clearly we are, and all of the people he invokes, which I've dug into some of it, to some usually like a very minute degree, but I'm hoping to think things out here. So if we're gonna do that, then we have to invoke the idea of meaning. So meaning is an idea. He says it's a metaphor for an analogy for the way that sentences have meaning. I don't know that I fully buy that idea. It feels a little, I would need to be more convinced. It doesn't necessarily follow. To me, what do I think of meaning? Meaning is like, there's a feeling to it, a feeling to meaning. It's a sense of connection. Connection. What is a sense of connection? What does that feel like? Are would say it's similar to affection, um, closeness, which, if we're to jump into, a more materialistic frame, would be something like, um, you know, those actions which invoke oxytocin, assuming that that is what is present when those feelings are present, right? If we assume that there's some sort of oxytocin oriented thing that happens when we feel connected to the environment that we're in, to a degree. Um, so I think we could say wisdom is inherently good. That is, there is that goodness is an attribute of wisdom. I feel like if we're talking about wisdom in the general sense, not in like having wisdom with respect to a certain subject, because we would just call that like being good at the thing, or what the Chinese call gong fu. Right? So facility within a certain range of, within a certain subject, right? Skill. But I think the idea of wisdom more generally, I don't know. I think this is where I am at my limit in terms of how I can analyze this, right? So the conundrum is, I value this thing called wisdom, right? But I don't really know what it is, it would seem. It seems to be, I think I'm getting stuck in a sort of circularity, because I'm saying, well, a wise person is someone who is well adapted to a wise affordance landscape, a wise environment. So then, what is the landscape of a wise environment? And typically, like, we could consider, pro-social behaviors, which is behaviors that are fundamentally cooperative, connective behaviors. We would probably consider wise. What we would probably consider wise are those knowing when to connect to the people around us and when to disconnect. So once again, we're invoking that ratio aspect, right? Like, we want to avoid foolish behaviors and do wise behaviors, right? But we're still having a circular kind of thought in saying wise behaviors. So how do we get to how wise behaviors are? How do we get to determining which affordances are wise and which affordances are foolish? The things to the signal from the noise, right? There can be toxic prosociality that is appeasing, and there can be good prosociality, which is probably more like valuing people beyond valuing the things in an environment beyond the mere appearance of doing so. Actually valuing, maybe. Not mere valuing, but actually valuing. And now what's sort of coming up in my mind is the idea of the having mode and the being mode, right? So you have the having mode, which is oriented towards accumulation and material needs, which we need to survive. It's foundational, but it's also base. Uh, and then we have uh, the being mode, which is more oriented towards things in and of themselves, which we can apply to the degree we can objectify things. We can also I want to say personify, but that's we do personify things, but when we personify things, we give them kind of an end to themselfness. And we can do this to anything. And now what has sort of jumped to mind is the idea that that's in some ways a way that we can constrain things to create new subjects and affordances. So like we take a second look at a thing. It's taking a second look. We look at a thing and then we re-engage with something that we might otherwise have disregarded. So it's an attending to the thing, and in that attendance it reveals itself more to us, and we through our giving it more time, which in a lot of ways is the space of our being. That is, we could conceive of time as the space of our being. That is, we only have so much space with which we can be before we stop having that space. That is, we die. So in holding that space of our being to the thing that we are attending, we are allowing it to take on meaning in that we are giving it more space to be in us. What's another way of saying that? So we're just going along being, and there is a way in which our existence in the world, the way that we are in the world, that is what something that humans do is we pay attention to things and we remember them, right? So when we attend to something, we in some circumstances are more likely to remember it. We're giving it more space in our memory. We're kind of ingesting the thing, but it's not like consumption. We're taking it in. We're taking on certain aspects of the thing in order so that we remember it. If we were not to attend to it, if we were to disregard it, if we were to not allow it space in ourselves in the form of our memory, it would then not exist to us. But in taking it in, we're not just representing it to ourselves. We are in some ways becoming it to a degree. All right. I think this is as far as I'm able to go at this moment. I think we did some decent thinking. I think we could do better. I think we're sort of onto something, but what that thing is, I'm not really sure. We need to put some more work in. But not bad. I'll try to do some more with this maybe tomorrow. Probably not tomorrow. I'm not sure when I'm coming back to this. But I just want to get my thoughts sort of sorted. Alright. I'm going to say that that's the end for the moment, and I'll come back at a later time. Alright.